What's up, everybody? Aaron Smith here with Northern Kentucky FSBO Guide, and also with Keller Williams Realty in Northern Kentucky. Today we are going to be talking about the contractual negotiations and the actual contract in a real estate transaction. Now, as someone who's choosing to sell the home yourself, I would recommend either consulting with an attorney to get a real estate purchase contract. It can be a boilerplate contract, or you can have them actually, once you've found the buyer, you can have them draw the contract up. You may not know when you're getting started whether your buyer is going to be represented by a real estate agent or whether their buyer is going to be represented by no one. So as long as you can get your hands on a contract that may be affordable and it's not going to cost you a lot of money, because the buyer that comes along may choose to use the contract that their real estate agent provides. That happens a lot, and that actually may save you some change on that side too. So when it comes to contracts, usually the initiator of that contract is going to be the buyer. If they're unrepresented, then that initiator may need to be you. You may need to provide a contract and say, hey, look, here's the contract, go ahead and fill it in, or let's sit down at the table and talk about the details in the contract and fill it in ourselves. Typically in a buyer consultation, when I have a buyer, the first thing that I do is I do about a half hour to a 1 hour consultation with them, and I explain things like earnest money, home inspection, and closing timelines, financial contingencies, and things like that. If your buyer's brand new to real estate contracts, or if they've only done this once or twice and they've never done it alone, you may need to do a little education session there, or provide them with some information, or maybe you just take charge and fill in the contract and say, here, sign here. So let's talk about like the bigger. We're going to talk about the bigger terminology in the contract, just so you understand fully the things that go into it. So first thing and most important thing in the contract is going to be the price. Make sure you get the price written in there. And typically right after the price is what the buyer is offering is earnest money. Earnest money is what's often referred to as a good faith deposit. It's a deposit on the contract that gets usually held by a title company or a real estate broker or a third party. It can also be held by any seller. The seller can hold the earnest money. As a seller, you may want to hold the earnest money. It's usually treated in a certain way that's dictated by the state that you live in. So in Kentucky, if you put down earnest money, if there's a problem with the contract, and if neither the buyer nor seller can determine what happens to the earnest money, then the earnest money typically gets returned to the buyer after 2 years, I believe. So earnest money. In some markets around the country, earnest money is about 1% of the purchase contract. Sometimes it's more. In our area, it's a little bit more relaxed. So I tend to think that our market operates in tiers of earnest money. And what I mean by that is, if you're under $100,000, it's not uncommon to see $500 in earnest money. If you're selling a property under, say, $150,000 to $200,000, it's not uncommon to see $1,000 in earnest money. $300,000, you might have $2,000 in earnest money. So it's kind of like a bracketed thing. There's no magic to it. Usually these contracts have contingencies in them, like a home inspection and financing contingencies that protect the earnest money, so that if there is a problem, home inspection kind of turns south and there's bigger issues that need to be addressed than the buyer's willing to work with, the buyer can terminate the contract and request their earnest money back. And that's part of it. So if you're selling your home yourself, make sure you do your due diligence there, do some research on earnest money in the state of Kentucky, and know how that's treated and what that means for you as a seller. Next in the purchase contract is typically the financing contingency. There's different lenders out there. There's different types of loans that buyers can obtain. And the financing contingency is going to dictate a couple of things. Number one, what type of loan is it? Is it an FHA loan, which is backed by the government? Is it a VA loan, also backed by the government? Is it a conventional loan where the buyer's putting down at least, well, just so you know, the minimum on a conventional loan to put down is 3% There may be some PMI or private mortgage insurance on that, 5%, 10%, and the best buyers that put down the most money are going to put down 20%. They're going to get the best rates out there and the lowest monthly payment typically. Financing contingencies, FHA is 3.5% down, VA is no money down. You can do a USDA no money down if you're in rural housing USDA territory. There are a few other loans out there. Obviously cash would be great. There's no appraisal involved with cash. So the financing contingency is typically going to have a couple of things. How much of the property are they financing and how much are they putting down as a down payment? What's the interest rate, so that if interest rates spike and go up overnight and the buyer says, well, I had a 5.125% interest rate on a 30-year fixed loan and the interest rates jump up to 5.5%. Well, now they have an out in the contract if their interest rate goes higher and they're unable to obtain financing at 5.125%. So that's a contingency that you got to watch out for. And if they put some ridiculous number in there like, hey, I'm going to obtain a 30-year loan for 2.5% interest, that's a red flag. It's something to keep your eyes and ears open for, because it just gives them an automatic out in the contract if they want it. And just aside of the financing contingency, a lot of buyers lately are asking for the seller to pay a portion of their closing costs. Now, the closing costs associated with the loan are typically your loan origination fees, the appraisal cost, any sort of reserves associated with setting up an escrow account that is there to pay your taxes and insurance. So those are closing costs, and then prepaid items are things like your first year's homeowner's insurance. Your appraisal actually, I think, comes into a prepaid item. And a lot of times buyers are asking for about 3% of the purchase price in closing costs. So if you're buying a $100,000 house, it's $3,000 in closing costs. But it kind of levels off a little bit. So I mean, just because you're buying a $300,000 house doesn't mean your closing costs are going to be $9,000. It's probably going to be closer to $5,000. So keep in mind that buyers may ask for you to pay a portion of their closing costs or all their closing costs. That's why when we talk about negotiating price, the big number doesn't really matter as much as the small number. Right, so when they offer you $175,000 for your house, and then they ask for $5,000 in closing costs, well, that's really only a $170,000 offer. So just keep that in mind. Moving on, other contingencies in the contract. A lot of times buyers will ask for the seller to provide a 1-year home warranty. That warranty is going to cover the water heater, heating and air system, all the kitchen appliances, some of the plumbing fixtures, and things like that. If you have a home with older heating and air systems, older water heaters, older appliances, this may help you during the home inspection process. An inspector may tell a buyer, hey, the water heater's 10 years old and they usually only last about 10 to 12 years. Well, the buyer's going to think, well, we're going to have to install a $700 or $800 water heater right after we move into this thing. Well, if you're providing a home warranty at $400, that protects them and says that they're not going to have to go out there and replace the water heater without any assistance. So there is another video that you should watch. It is on the home inspection process and talks about what buyers look for, what to expect in the home inspection process. So if you haven't watched that video yet, feel free to take a look at that. But the inspection contingency in the contract, typically buyers are going to ask for somewhere between 7 to 10 days to complete all their inspections. Could be just a whole house inspection. It could be a whole house inspection plus a termite inspection. They could do a radon test. They could do a mold test. It just depends. If your house was built prior to 1978, there's a possibility, slim possibility, but still a possibility that the buyer could do a lead-based paint inspection that would test for lead-based paint. And so what happens in that 10 days is the buyer sets up the home inspection, the inspector comes out. Usually the report is back in the buyer's hands within 24 hours after the inspection. And then let's say, for example, they put 10 days in the contract for a home inspection. Well, by midnight on the 10th day, typically in our Northern Kentucky Board of Realtors contract, by midnight on the 10th day, they need to have either a release of the contingency that says we're moving forward with the property as is. They need to have you a list of items that they have selected that need to be addressed in the post-inspection. Or it's possible that a buyer could withdraw from the contract if the condition of the home is not in alignment with safe and it's got a lot of defects. So usually of those three, you're going to have a buyer come back with some issues in the home inspection, and hopefully it's not these little nickel and dimey things. But if you had to spend $100 on nickel and dimey things versus a lot of money on a new roof or something like that, I guess it would be preferred. But ultimately, you want the buyer to just move forward with the home sale. However, that's not always the case. Moving forward, so other items in the contract are going to be things like the title company, which title company. If you've already talked to a title company about the sale of your house, you may recommend that the buyer use your title company. That doesn't happen a lot. On most of the loans that I mentioned to you before, they can close in 30 to 45 days. Keep in mind, the closer to the end of a month that you close, the lower the buyer's closing costs are going to be due to prorated interest. And the closing process, as you approach closing, the title company is going to be pulling information from the county, checking for liens and all that. They're going to need your social security numbers, your bank account, or not your bank account, your mortgage number, whoever holds your mortgage, and the loan account number, so that they can pay off your mortgage at the time of closing. And you'll need to bring valid driver's license or photo ID, government issued photo ID, to closing so that the notary can validate that. And other than that, I mean, the contractual things, there's a lot of dates that need to be hit. There's some terminology to watch out for, or to add if you need to. Things, like just as an example, if you need to hit a certain closing date, you can, put some thing in there like time is of the essence or something like that. But if you don't have experience working with contracts, check out, talking to an attorney. You can give me a call. I can kind of walk you through some things if you need to. I may have glossed over some stuff in the contracts. Usually there's a lot more jargon in there about, arbitration if there's an issue or something like that. But those are the high points, and those are the details that most people negotiate out in the contract. Hope it's helpful. NKYFSBOguide.com will lead you right to these videos. Feel free to check out our other videos in our feed. Feel free to call me anytime that you may want to ask a question, if you need to provide me with some information that may be helpful to other people here in Northern Kentucky who are selling their homes themselves. And as always, I'm here to help. Give me a call if you need me. Thanks.